wait a minute, just because something feels familiar, like the person who disappoints you, doesn't mean it's right. You know, that chemistry that she kept feeling was like, oh, you feel familiar, come closer.
People live, or sometimes we assume that people live very problem-driven lives. So when they come and see you, they feel they have to start with a problem.
Yeah.
Or sometimes when you see a friend, you feel like you have to share something that's going wrong for there to be a conversation. I feel like almost problems and wrongs have become better conversation starters, or more, I would say, more comfortable conversation starters for people, as opposed to something positive. Do you see that a lot?
You know what's so interesting?
Yeah.
I think that we have this weird dichotomy where on the internet, everybody's posting all the positive things. In person, everybody's sharing all the negative things.
So true, yeah.
And so there's not that balance. I think that a lot of the time we're kind of using our friendships to kind of download our problems, but we're not actually listening. When I was training, I was doing my internship, a clinical supervisor said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. There's a reason for that ratio.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we don't know how to listen. And so sometimes we feel like when someone's telling us something that we need to problem solve for them. We don't know just how to sit with them and not fix it for them. And we don't realize too that sometimes we're helping them by helping them to hear themselves more clearly.
Yes.
And if we talk for them, if we talk over them, they can't hear themselves. We're talking over their internal voice.
That last bit there at the end that you just mentioned is so powerful. We're talking over their internal voice, and actually simply listening to them allows them to hear themselves.
Yes.
And you're so right. I feel like my best conversations are definitely when I can find the narrative just by being able to share and share and share, because most of the time we talk for 2 minutes and the person giving the answer talks for 8. And it's almost like, you know, and now it's like, okay, now do I take that answer? They don't quite understand me. And then, right, it just kind of gets lost. So how do we shift? Is talking about our problems useful? With who is it useful? And when is it useful?
Yeah, I think you have to choose your audience.
Yeah.
I think so many times people have had bad experiences. Let's say that growing up they had bad experiences. And so then they end up choosing someone who will disappoint them. And then they say, see what happens when I'm vulnerable? See how that doesn't work? Yeah. And what happens is they don't realize that they're repeating this pattern. One thing that therapy really does for people is it helps them to see you are making choices that are repeating, that are helping you to repeat a pattern that is making you unhappy, that is keeping you stuck. And people don't realize that they're doing that. There's a woman in the book who keeps hooking up with the wrong guys, right? And including, by the way, one from the waiting room. I don't mean in the waiting room, it's not that exciting in her office, but she meets him in the waiting room. And I know because of her pattern that, you know, this is gonna be a disaster. And she keeps saying, oh, it's the guys, it's this person, it's that person. And she doesn't realize that these people are so much like the people she grew up around. And I don't mean that we're blaming people's parents, because I think that most parents did their absolute best. You know, most parents really want to be a good parent, but sometimes they didn't know how, or they were very limited, or there were some mental health issues, or whatever it might be. And so they couldn't give their kids that mirroring experience that, you know, is something that they would want in an adult relationship. And so with her, it takes her so long to realize that when she meets someone who is going to give her what she wants, she's like, oh, I'm not attracted, no chemistry, right? It's almost like she doesn't know how to be around someone who will give her what she wants. And there's a learning process around, well, wait a minute, just because something feels familiar, like the person who disappoints you, doesn't mean it's right. You know, that chemistry that she kept feeling was like, oh, you feel familiar, come closer.
Yeah.
It's like, no, the fact that you feel familiar should be a sign, like, let's try something different. Let's go into this place of unfamiliarity, and it will be uncomfortable because you don't know the customs in this country. You haven't been to this country before. You're gonna have to use your guidebook and learn your way around a little bit. But why don't you see what it's like over in that country?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. What is your take on the elusive chemistry when people talk about it in their partnerships? And, you know, the way I've always understood it is, I've always felt that when you look at chemistry and compatibility, chemistry is something that I can feel multiple times a day with different people.
Yep.
I can feel it with the barista. I can feel it with my personal trainer. I can feel it with someone I'm just taking the train home with. Like chemistry is something I can feel over and over again. Compatibility is something I can't. It's not as easily replaceable. It took longer to build, and it's something that I have with less people in the world in general.
Yep.
And so for me, I always look at chemistry as that elusive thing, because I hear the same. My friends will come back from dates and be like, Jay, like, but there was no chemistry. And I'm like, okay, wait, so tell me about that and how you've tackled helping people understand chemistry and filter it better.
Yeah. So this is, I love that we're having this conversation, because this is such an important part of relationship. So many times people will say, they went on a first date with somebody and they're like, yeah, no, I had a really good time, but there was no chemistry. And I said, well, having the really good time might mean that there's potential for chemistry.
Yes.
But what they do is, because they're on the apps and they say, oh, well, there's like 10,000 other people that I can date. And they just keep recycling and recycling and recycling, and they don't give something time or space to grow. And chemistry sometimes happens right away, and other times it takes time to grow. So there are these surveys that were done where men and women were followed for 20 years, from the moment that they went on a first date through marriages, divorces, all these things. And what happened was, a lot of people have revised their stories depending on what happened later. So the people who are happily married, let's say, a lot of them said, well, tell us about the first date. When they're telling it now, they say, oh yeah, there was instant chemistry. But what they reported at the time was, yeah, I don't know, maybe I'll go on a second date. I don't know, there's not a lot here. But it built, and so their story became there was instant chemistry, right? Now the people who were divorced, sometimes they would say, oh, I knew I never liked this person from the beginning. And yet at the time they reported, oh my God, we had this amazing chemistry, right? So it's not very reliable that first time, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It takes time. So you go on a first date or a first meeting with somebody, and you say, did you have a good time? Would you like to spend another hour with this person? And then see whether something develops. Sometimes it does. A lot of the times it does. A lot of the time it doesn't. But you won't know until you give it some breathing room. I should say too that, there's this saying that we marry our unfinished business. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times, if you haven't worked through some of these ways of being in relationship that didn't work very well for you, you seek them out in other people without realizing it. So the person will look very different, let's say from your mom or your dad or whomever, and yet, once you get to know that person, you're like, oh God, oh wait, this feels really like, oh, I recognize that. I didn't see that at all, right? So that's our unfinished business. So you really gotta work through your stuff so that you can meet the person that you're going to have true, authentic chemistry with, and not this kind of like chaotic chemistry with.
Yeah, chaotic chemistry is a really nice way to put it, because yeah, that's often what it is. It's like everything's chaotic, but we feel chemistry. It's, it's like...
Well, people will say, I have so much chemistry with this person, even though I can't rely on this person, or I'm always nervous, I'm always on edge, I never know where I stand with this person, but we have so much chemistry. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, and it's crazy how, I'd love to date back actually, and I'm doing some research on it right now. I'd love to hear if you already know it, but I'm really interested in where that desire for chemistry ever even sourced. Like where it started, like that want that we all have for wanting to feel chemistry. Like I wonder whether it was a movie, or because I remember the first time I wanted a girlfriend was because I watched a movie. Yeah. My favorite character like was attracted to this girl, and I was like, oh, maybe I should have a girlfriend. Like I didn't, I was a kid and I didn't even know what that meant. Yeah. But it was just so cleverly planted into my mind that I didn't feel complete without a partner. And it's fascinating to me look at where these things started, because sometimes they're just things that you've heard over and over again in movies or books or songs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we define chemistry as sort of like this instant magical thing. And chemistry is so multifactorial. It's about, what is this energy that goes on between the two of you, and how are you together in daily life, not like on the vacation in Tahiti, right? So when people think about spending their lives with somebody, it's about the day-to-day. It's about how do we get through the hard things? How do we listen to each other? How do we deal with the places that we disagree? How do we deal with the differences between us? Because we think of chemistry as like that overlap. Like we both love sushi and rollerblading and this movie and that book and, and we're vegan and, whatever it is, right? Yeah. And that's not chemistry. Yeah. Chemistry is, how do we inhabit the same space knowing that we're two separate human beings, and how do we stay connected even with the space between us?
Here are 3 signs you're struggling with a lack of purpose. Number 1, you feel pressure to know what you want to do with your life. Number 2, you've lost interest in your own life and feel disconnected. Number 3, you don't know what your skills are or you feel you lack them. Hope is not lost. You can get through this. Having purpose and meaning in our lives helps guide us through the ups and downs and create structure in our day-to-day life. That's why I've partnered with Calm, the leading app for mental health and wellness. The app has a library with thousands of meditations, songs to help you relax and focus, and sleep stories to help you get a good night's rest. And now you can find the Daily J, a daily series where I'm sharing proven tools and techniques to improve your mindset and mental health in a matter of minutes.